There are now new definitions of enemies and allies and friends that go beyond boundaries, beyond ethnic identities, beyond religion. We used to talk about the degradation of the environment as a global enemy, poverty, illiteracy, oppression as global enemies. And now there is a new type of violence that specifically targets innocent human beings, and that targets also the humanity within each one of us, the sense of human values and solidarity and, of course, freedom. This kind of enemy requires a new and different form, a different approach. And I think you will find, I've never seen such tremendous sympathy and solidarity with the American people as I have seen in the last 2 days. There is a reaching out to the American people because everybody recognizes that they are victims. But how do we deconstruct terrorism? How do we deal with it by removing it bit by bit? It's not by reacting in a way that would lead to greater victimization. It's not by labeling whole nations or whole identities or whole religions or ethnic groups. It's not by resorting to collective punitive measures, but really by trying, first of all, to resolve issues and problems, especially outstanding conflicts and situations of injustice, and by moving ahead by constructive, I think, more than destructive means. And all this escalation in military talk and threat, I think would be satisfying at the moment because people would feel they've exacted revenge and retribution, but it doesn't solve the long-term issues and the real underlying causes, which have to be dealt with responsibly and within a collective vision of the rule of law.
Let me jump in once again and turn to General Barak and ask him to respond both to what you have said and also to this notion of deconstructing terrorism. Clearly, as you hear Dr. Ashrawi talk, I think her vision of how that is done might differ markedly from yours, or at this point also from the U.S. leadership's vision.
Unfortunately, the Palestinian movement under Arafat was involved in too many suicide attacks that are well imprinted on our collective memory, including those that has to do with hijacking airplanes and exploding them or leading them to other disasters all around the world. And if those Palestinians who kind of erupted in exuberance about these terrorist attacks were surrounded by so many talks about humanity as we've just heard, and they were not exposed to direct incitement and actual terror run by their own leaders, maybe they would respond differently under this moment. You know, our legendary Foreign First Minister Abba Eban once said that the Palestinians never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. It happened to them 10 years ago. We have mentioned earlier the Gulf Storm. It was at that time that Arafat, out of all people in the world, decided to support Saddam Hussein. And it happened once again a year ago when an offer was put on the table by President Clinton and myself to put an end to the conflict by having a very painful decisions on both sides, but decisions that will put an end to the conflict. And Arafat was unready even to take it as a basis for negotiation and deliberately decided to turn back into violence. But let me tell you frankly, I don't believe that it has to do directly with this event in Washington, since we remember that at the heights of Oslo under Rabin or Peres, when Arafat got a Nobel Peace Prize, there was an attempt on the World Trade Center by another Muslim fundamentalist. It is much more profound. We should not generalize for the whole Muslim population, for the whole Muslim world. It would be a major mistake, but we should not be wavering, or there should be no treble in our voice when we point directly to every terror thug and calling every leader, including Chairman Arafat, to become accountable to his behavior, not to the words we are hearing from his spokesman or spokeswoman.
Let me ask you, we could use a little practical advice at this point. As you look at what you have seen so far of the information that is coming in, do you have any sense of who these people are? I mean, do we just seize on the name Osama bin Laden out of desperation because it may be the only name we know? Or do you think he really has an organization capable of carrying out this kind of an attack?
He clearly has an organization that is capable of this type of attack. I don't know for sure whether he is behind this, but it's clear to me, bearing in mind the sheer magnitude of this disaster and its immediate results, that the world doesn't have the alternative to ignore his deeds or his capabilities, and he should be part of the objective. Now, he is hosted by Afghanistan, maybe to an extent by the Sudanese, and they also should be held accountable. It doesn't mean that immediately they should be attacked, but they should be called upon for an action, and within a limited time they should act upon him in order to put an end to his deployment, his infrastructure, his training installation within their boundaries. And whoever will refuse to act upon such an information that I believe could be collected by a coordination between the CIA and other similar agencies in the world, I believe that once they refuse, there will be no way but to be ready to attack their own infrastructure or installation until they yield. I should remind you that there was never a question whether Gaddafi, for example, should be cornered. No one really asked who will replace him, what will be the consequences. Once it became clear that he personally was involved in launching these two gentlemen that exploded the Pan Am airplane over Lockerbie, both following American administration, together with British ones, were ready to stand firm, never swaying, and keep a sustained effort until Gaddafi had changed. And this is exactly what had been needed. I can remind you, I remember an American national hero, later a presidential candidate, Bob Dole, in the palace of Saddam Hussein. I remember Jesse Jackson there. I remember Ambassador Gillespie spending months with Saddam Hussein. But once it became clear that what he has in mind is erasing from the map and maybe from history a neighboring country, Bush Sr. and Vice President Cheney and General Powell and many others knew exactly what should be done, and they did it. And I believe that we are in a defining moment. No other behavior is congruent with the legacy and with the real fighting spirit of the American people and of freedom lovers all around the world.
General Barak, I should point out that earlier in this broadcast, I don't think you were able to hear me at that time, I reported what an Arab news agency was reporting, which at the time was suggesting that the government in Afghanistan, the Taliban, was holding Osama bin Laden under house arrest. I have an update on that story now from Reuters, which says Afghanistan's ruling Taliban on Thursday denied that report, that Saudi fugitive Osama bin Laden has been placed under house arrest. This morning, Taliban sources in Koppel told AIP that these news stories that Osama or any of his associates have been arrested are false and fabricated. That from the Pakistan-based AIP. Now, if in fact the Taliban refuses to hand him over, and I'm going to have to ask you to give your response in about 30 seconds or so, if you would, because we have to take a pause. Are you recommending then that the United States and the Europeans take military action against the Taliban in Afghanistan?
If I should answer, I would say that it's inevitable that if nothing will be done in regard to Osama bin Laden, and is really there according to the intelligence, it's not about house arrest. It's about bringing him to the same kind of treatment that Milosevic is getting now, or maybe even worse, and to put an end to his infrastructure. I'm confident that what should be done, it will be done. But I have no doubts what the president has on his mind, and I know personally some of his aides, and I'm confident that
I have to, forgive me, but I have to interrupt you. We have to take a short break. This is Ted Koppel in London, continuing ABC News' coverage, which, as you know, has been going on uninterruptedly now, ever since the attack on the World Trade Center in southern Manhattan, in the southernmost part of Manhattan, and the attack on the Pentagon. My ABC colleagues and I have been on the air continually since then. I have been speaking these last few minutes, and I'm still talking now to the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Barak, and to Hanan Ashrawi, who is a Palestinian member of Parliament and the newly appointed Commissioner for Information and Public Policy for the Arab League. General Barak, I want to give you a chance just to complete your answer, because I had to interrupt you there a moment ago. I was asking whether you felt that the United States and perhaps also the Europeans, if indeed the Taliban refuses to hand over Osama bin Laden, and it is concluded that he and his associates were responsible for this attack, what are you saying the United States should do with regard to Afghanistan or any other government that has been involved?
It's clear that if those rogue leaders who are harboring or hosting a terror will do the job by themselves, put an end to it, put the people responsible under arrest, send them to international bodies to be brought to justice, it will be okay. No one wants, out of a kind of obsession, to hit them. But I predict that quite probably they won't, and that a result of it, certain, maybe limited size, but certain highly targeted and determined action might take place in the near future when it becomes clear who is responsible. But the more important effort is a sustainable one over the following several years, with a lot of, unfortunately, with a lot of ups and downs and some painful moments and disasters, but ultimately the free world will prevail, since we are protecting our very essence of way of life against terror and some terror thugs under masks, and we have to unmask them, to expose them, to put them to accountability, being either terror thugs or rogue leaders. There is no other way. After what we have experienced in the last 36 hours, no world order and no Western civilization will be able to hold if we will not show the tenacity, determination, have even readiness to take certain pains along the way in order to put an end to these phenomena, whether it takes few months or even half a generation.
General Barak, thank you very much. You're always very patient, and I appreciate your willingness to come on and spend some time with me. Dr. Ashrawi, I want to give you an opportunity for a few final comments also. As you listen to General Barak, do you too see this as an ongoing conflict that is going to have to be sustained for, as General Barak says, perhaps half a generation?
No, I think if there is sufficient will and the ability to intervene, and of course, as I said, to use the available instruments in order to hold people accountable, to try and to punish those who are responsible, and at the same time to resolve these outstanding issues, if we can do them very quickly, then I think we can see results, particularly when we can identify areas of conflict that produce such organizations and groups. I would like to remind you from the beginning that when Mr. Barak started maligning a whole nation and entered into this diatribe against President Arafat and trying to associate us with terrorism, guilt by association, so to speak, that the party that introduced terrorism in our region was Israel during its creation. It was the Jewish gangs, the assassination of Count Bernadotte, the blowing up of the King David. All these things were alien to our part of the world. And we are now in a state of siege and occupation. And all the history of massacres against civilians has been carried out by Israel. I don't want to mention, Deir Yassin,